Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Rugby World Cup Weekly. Each week I'll be joined by guests from the rugby world to take a look back on that weekend's action. Joining me tonight are English, Scottish and Welsh fans. Firstly, we're joined by two returnees, one of which following on from a crowd-pleasing preview of Scotland. It's our Pool B compatriot, Craig Manson. Welcome back, Craig.
Good evening. Thanks for having me back.
Always good to have you on. And he's joined by Welsh writer who made his debut all the way back in March, Iestyn Thomas. Pleasure to have you on, Iestyn.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Do we get caps for like appearances or like in international rugby, or is it?
Oh, maybe for like 150 and 100. I think that
Oh,
is that
that's
fair?
fine. 48 to go. Yeah.
I'm just happy a couple of appearances and they get a tie.
Oh,
20 for the player,
maybe.
then.
Yeah. But then again, lads, there's a cost of living crisis. It affects everyone. But anyways, later on, we'll be joined by Ben Nurse as well, who'll look back specifically on England's win over Argentina and Australia's convincing victory over Georgia. But before we begin, I just want to remind everyone at home that's listening, we're not covering Ireland's win over Romania in this game, not because of the blowout nature, but because we have recorded a prior podcast which went out on Saturday afternoons. That is if you click into the podcast feed, that will be the most recent one from this channel before this one. But we are going to start with our game of the week, which is Wales's last gasp victory over Fiji in what was an instant classic. Gatland's men ran out 32-26 victors in Bordeaux, thanks to tries from Josh Adams, Lewis Rees-Zammit, George North, and Elliot Dee, and a player of the match performance from one and only Dan Biggar. It was a game not short of controversy. It was filled with drama, but all in all, Iestyn, it was an ideal start for Wales.
Yeah, without a doubt, if someone had told me Wales would have had a bonus point win against Fiji to kick off the World Cup, I would have taken it no matter what. And like you say, it was a fantastic game of rugby. As we mentioned, it is game of the week, and rightly so. It was brilliant, from Wales's blistering start, getting a penalty and an early try from Josh Adams, then Fiji hitting back with two tries of their own, which were the second one was absolutely superb. Then obviously Wales took the lead at half time thanks to a George North try, which had a little defensive error by the Fijian centres, before Wales really flexing their wings a little bit, getting a third try thanks to Lewis Rees-Zammit, which came from a fantastic Jack Morgan crossfield kick. And then Fiji got a little bit close to the Welsh try line. There's been a lot of debate about it, but I'm not going to talk about it. Then Biggar hit the 50-22, which Wales took that chance. The red zone efficiency from the Welsh was superb. Elliot Dee rolled in from a rolling maul. Then it all got a little bit tense as Fiji scored twice in the last 10 minutes, and they blew a fantastic opportunity to win it to the death.
Well, it's you hate to be too critical, but there is the element of, well, if that pass goes infield to, I believe it was to Isova, as opposed to skip pass to Randrandra, they're probably under the post, and we're probably talking about another Fijian scalp over Wales in a World Cup in France. Coincidentally, it was. Yeah. Go on, yes.
Yeah, it was. I think it was Nice Levu that was on the outside. I think it was Taylor, the fly off, who gave the pass out. And the Wales defence had Liam Williams covering around the backfield. They had isolated North and Tompkins, so it was just Zammit. Well, North was opposite Teddy Taylor, and then you had Zammit and Liam Williams coming around. And I'm not sure Liam Williams would have come in on the inside to hit Nice Levu. So if the Fijian outside half made the short to pass to Nice Levu, he'd have gone straight through the middle and he'd have probably beaten Liam Williams, and that was a try, which would have given them a much easier kick. But unfortunately, they tried the looping pass, and of all people, Semi Randrandra dropped the ball, which was a killer blow for them.
And you mentioned their centre pairing; they were absolutely phenomenal. Randrandra and Nice Levu, the latter of which has been in incredible form. He was brilliant against England as well. And Fiji now are in a situation where they kind of have to beat Australia, which is unfortunate because, yes, they had to be one of them anyway, but the fact that it may boil down to a round 2 game, especially after how we've seen the World Cup went last time as well, where it just simmered out and it was gone in no stage. And I suppose, Craig, we have the neutral eye on this one. Most neutrals were rooting for Fiji. We're not gonna pretend like an awful lot of us weren't. It was a cracking game, but for Wales to get the job done, that's huge for them, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I think what we've seen, and not to go too fast forward into the end of this podcast, but what we've seen over the weekend is all of the sort of the teams that everyone's kind of going, oh well, there's a chance they could be turned over. There's a chance they can be turned over by this team, or they've all asserted their dominance a little bit. So I think Wales. It's not that I wasn't in doubt. I thought Fiji were either going to absolutely break Wales, or Wales were going to beat them. And it looked like at the beginning, oh, Fiji are really on it, but they just, as Wales do, and Wales play rugby, and they can adapt, and they can kick, and they can not. I'm being unfair by saying grind a team down, but they know how to play against different types of teams. And when we come on to Scotland, I'll probably say that well, I'm going to say that Scotland don't seem to, and neither and England haven't had that opportunity before either. They seem to struggle to deal with different game plans. But Wales seem to have just ground the win out, and then when the tries started to come, the dam almost broke.
Absolutely, and there's the bigger picture side of things as well. Iestyn, when you were on with us previously after the Six Nations, it was all doom and doom about Wales. It was questioning, like, could Italy have really beaten them if Italy had a bit more courage at the time? And they'd lost to England. They didn't fire a shot in that game after a hectic week, and it felt like, okay, there was green shoots, but there was also an awful lot of red flags. Now it actually feels like it's completely flipped on its head, and we don't want to just beat them up after one game, because we know an awful lot can happen. They've Australia and Georgia to come. They've lost to those two teams very recently. So it has been a great turnaround from Gatland, to his credit, to go from a poor Six Nations to now looking at it, yes, helped by the draw, and thinking, they could take third or fourth place in this World Cup.
Yeah, and I don't think the summer series was that particularly impressive. I know they beat England in Cardiff, which was a good performance and a good win, but the away game in Twickenham was particularly worrying at the time, when Wales's line-out went to pieces. Obviously, we now know that was a different line-out tactic that they were trying to use, and obviously when South Africa came to town, it was a bit of a bloodbath at times. But they did sort that out somehow, and they went back to basics. Just if you look at the opening 10 minutes, Adam Beard is lifted up for the first kickoff, and they form a maul, which gets him a couple of meters before Gareth David just sends one in the air. A brilliant chase by Josh Adams and the rest of the Welsh defence. And then all of a sudden, Will Rowlands is over a jackal, and that's a penalty, which Biggar kicks 3 points. So it's just basics like that we didn't really see, and we saw a couple of times in the way Pivac, but Pivac was too stubborn and always wanted an open and expansive style of rugby. But this is Gatland. This is how Gatland wants to play rugby. This is what people call as Warren Ball, even though Gatland hates the term, but it is what it is. And even though there was at times where Wales did sway away from that, and sometimes there's a little bit of frustration from supporters and probably Gatland himself. They managed to just dig in and get that result, which they really did need.
And an awful lot of the time, Gatland's results have been in spite of something, be it the WRU or fan opinion or regional form. And this has the hallmarks for World Cup that could be the exact same thing. He might just do it in spite of a really bad year for the regions and in the WRU in general. But that's what he does. That is what he does. And I suppose in any other week, because we'll move on now, like France against New Zealand would have been the best in class. It was an unbelievable opener. The opening ceremony brought mixed opinions. Some people were just happy it was short and sweet, but like it was a slow start of a game for everyone not named Mark Talea. Gregory Aldred inspired France to that 27-13 win. I gave myself this one in the running order as early as last Friday when I was getting the provisional notes out of the way, because this was spectacular. There's no other way about it. I think France showed that they can do different things. And one of the things I noted was they've almost come back slightly to the conservatism is a strong word, but almost conservatism that won them a Grand Slam. They're going to kick for 3 more. They're going to put you under pressure. They're going to squeeze the life out of you. And it'd be interesting to see with France, because you look at, say, Ireland, South Africa, they're wanting to score tries more than before. They're not going for three as easily. So will it pay off when they play someone like that in the quarterfinal? More than likely be one of those two in the quarterfinal in Saint Denis. Is really interesting. But the other side of it is, how good are New Zealand? You know, it a lot of people are saying, you know, favorites, second favorites. It's really hard to say that they're even inside the top three after that performance. They got by for the first 40, but that was really it. And like, as an Irish person, you know, or even South African, are probably thinking the same way. They're probably the dream matchup in that quarterfinal as opposed to France. Even if France are without Marchand, like, because they've got guys like Mavaka. And if they're without Entamac, well, Jalibert stepped up, and so on and so forth. They get Michelange back. They might get Zero Buy back by the end of the pool stages. They have the depth, they have the quality, and they are the team to be afraid of. And I suppose, Craig, over another weekend, we could be asking you about a potential World Cup quarterfinal against France. It could still happen. We'll see how the pool stage unfolds. But France do look to be a class ahead at the moment, don't they?
Yes and no. I think where their class is the, just as you say, that they're controlling a game, they're suffocating almost in defence, but they're incredibly good at turning around and going from a defence to attack very, very quickly. One person that you didn't mention, who I have a particular soft spot for is Damien Penaud. I think Damien Penaud is just someone who runs like he's just sauntering down the street, but some of the skill that he can produce is unbelievable. Some of the catches and tries he scores, you know, especially if there's a ball coming over, being kicked over to the try line, he can take it in the air and land, and just little things that he does, I just think are fantastic. But on the other side of things, and to maybe be a typical Scotsman who's full of himself, etc., but Scotland are France's kryptonite. I think you know, we can unlock them at times. Okay, fair enough, they've had enough class and enough, or we've let ourselves down in the first halves of games so that we have to kind of fight back at them. But if we could get rid of that, we could probably beat them, and we have beaten them. So, you know, I think if we had New Zealand, who just don't look themselves at the moment, I think the whole All Blacks never beaten them at all in our lifetime kind of voodoo would probably deal maybe a weak-minded Scotland in that side of things. But give us France, we could probably try our best to take them apart.
And they're not perfect. There's that too. And like, the other side of the injury coin is they might be just one more injury away from it unraveling. You know, it can happen. You know, that's like, we've seen it. You know, Ireland fans remember it's happened before to them, and it's happened to really every nation, I suppose, at some World Cup. But yes, and like, that was a great game. France laid down a marker, and it looks like they'll top the pool now, with no disrespect to Italy. But for New Zealand, there was an awful lot of question marks, I suppose. They've won 4 rugby championships in a row, but they've only won one of their last, I think it's 6 games against Ireland or France. They drew with England last time they played them. You know, they limped past Scotland and Murrayfield very recently. So there is an awful lot of question marks there. Do you think they are... Do you still see them getting through a quarterfinal and then potentially getting to a final, or do you think they're behind Ireland and South Africa?
Well, I'm not sure. Obviously, recent form would suggest what you just said, that they'd slip up to an Ireland or a South Africa in a quarter-final. But I don't want to rule out the All Blacks just yet. I know form is a little bit hit and miss, but like we saw at the start of the Rugby Championship, where they beat the Springboks, was it 35-17 or something like that? And they blitzed them in the opening 10-20 minutes, and the Springboks can come back from that. One thing on France, there's a rumour that Jonathan Danty might be back for the Uruguay game, which would be
apparently
a big boost for them. But back to New Zealand, there's still some really top class players there. I thought Rico Ioane had a good game Friday night. Obviously, he made the break for the first try and then set up the second try with the looping pass to Leia, who was also another standout. And I thought Bowden Barrett had a solid game at fullback. All right, they didn't end up on the winning side, of course, but those three all played particularly well, but they got a couple of injuries up front. Obviously, they lost Sam Kane right before kickoff, which could have been a bit of a blow. There's a bit of a rejig there as they put Tubavai, who's only played 1 or 2 games at blindside flanker. They put him at 6 for a World Cup game against France. That's a little bit tricky. And obviously Dalton Papali'i moved over to 7, which is a bit more of his preferred position. But never ever rule out the All Blacks just in case that comes back to bite you where you don't want it.
That's the other side of it as well. And like they did have some good performances. Mark Taleo was probably the standout one, not just because of his tries, but he always looks like he's going to do something. He has this upper body strength in a winger, even though he's not the biggest, that he just looks like he can shake you off. And there is certainly multiple pieces to the puzzle there that if New Zealand do click, maybe they will kick on and find another gear. Well, I suppose the other side of it is now they're kind of in a lose-lose situation the whole way until that second week of October, because if they hammer Italy or limp past Italy, we're going to have the exact same conversation, except it's going to be, well, we can't take anything from it if they hammer them, and they're a fallen giant if they only scrape past them. So they are in that kind of catch-22 situation. And just finally, Craig, like on that pool and France, New Zealand, we knew this would be a great game. It lived up to the billing and everything. But I just want to talk about that kind of the French side in particular. I know we touched about them already, but if they go into a World Cup quarterfinal, potentially against Ireland or South Africa, and they're in a situation where, they're relying on the likes of Jalibert as opposed to Ntamack, who's injured. They're relying on Woki and Flamon as opposed to Willemse. Obviously, if they get Dante back, it's a different situation. He's a better player for what they want to do than Mofana. Would you have as much confidence in France, even without these players? Because their next man up does seem to work, but at the same time, they're not unflappable either, I suppose.
Yeah, I think where you might find France tripping up, their depth now has been stretched because they can't just bring in a Jalibert. They don't have another one to come up, an Ntamack. They've got Ntamack, Jalibert. We all kind of went, he's not really at the level that Ntamack is, but he still proved his worth on the weekend. But there's no one I really think that would come in and give that level of service. So there's that, but also I think frustration with France. If they come up against a South Africa who as we saw on the weekend smother you, I think that's where the frustration comes out in France, and then the stupid things come in, and that's when the elbow to a head or the passes stop going to hand. And I think that's the only concern that I would have for France. But as a World Cup romantic, I'm looking forward to seeing them go as far as they possibly go, and I hope they get to the final, and I hope they win it. I think it'll be fabulous, unless Scotland are going to reclaim it and get back into there. And if you've ever listened to the podcast I'm on, and we've managed to work out a way of how we're going to get Scotland to the World Cup final. So, but yeah, I think it's. I think it'll be an interesting one, and I'm looking forward to it very much.
Well, unfortunately, Craig, you're after sullying the good work of BBC's Tom English, who says Scotland fans do not get ahead of themselves. Apparently, you do. We will move on to Marseille next, though, because, I understand, Craig, it might be hard for you to stand up here and say it was a great game of rugby, but for all the different moving parts that were involved with it, the physicality, the kicking game, how Scotland's attacked South Africa, I found it to be a great game myself. And eventually the reigning champions come out 18-3 victors. the other side of it is like Scotland, someone said they needed to win this game, given, their recent record against Ireland, and just so it doesn't come down to that last game against Ireland, which it now will. But instead, they were shut out to just 3 points for the second time in the World Cup in a row, that in their opening game, they, got essentially hockeyed. I know that it was different. There was more of a smothering effect, as the word we've used already. But this must be disappointing for Scotland fans to start throwing one like this.
I think it's one of those things. We were very, if we win, it's fantastic. If we lose, well, we're expecting it. So it's been one of those odd games. Definitely, first half we had the South Africans on. We're working with them, and we're looking at the game was looking far more equal. I think obviously the one break we really had, Darcy unfortunately decided that he wasn't going to pass the ball on, and unfortunately we had a 3-on-1 or a 3-on-2, and as everyone knows, and if they ever go to the rugby training, that's what we train for: 3-on-2s and 3-on-1s and 2-on-1s. You should be able to get past that. So if he'd actually put the pass in, and we have been guilty of that, especially in the Stuart Hogg era, of not passing the ball when we need to. However, some nice play came out when Finn Russell got the opportunity to do so, and my disappointment is more not the score, because obviously Steph Detroit did exactly what we expected him to do and crash over for the first try, and then probably the kick off the game that gave Libbok the player of the match, which I think we're all surprised at, just because he wasn't looking where he was kicking when it went. Put RNC over, and the game was won as such. I think I'm more frustrated with a couple of things. Obviously, we didn't see very much of Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones. I think that's probably because South Africa were incredibly good in their defence. They smothered Scotland. They targeted Finn Russell on a regular basis. And when people are, when we're looking at one of the highest paid players in the world playing at 10, of course he's going to be man-marked, and of course he's going to be the person that everyone's going to go for. If I would coach against him, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And then the second thing was our line-out, and people have said that Scotland's line-out is poor. It's not poor. We have some fantastic players in our line-out. Unfortunately, it goes awry at times, and unfortunately, when it goes awry, it's the wrong time. So I think especially one line out, I think if I remember correctly, if it had gone the way it should have gone, we probably could have pulled a score back. So it's disappointing. So yeah, we'll have to see how we go now.
You mentioned a point there about Russell, Tuipulotu and Jones, that midfield axis, and I might get Iestyn's thoughts on this in a minute, but just from an Irish point of view, that is where Ireland shut them down in Murrayfield this year. They kind of basically said, right, Finn, you don't really have an option here. We're just going to sit off. Yeah, they can run hard at us, but we kind of, what Ireland did was negate that midfield and then say, right, what are you going to do now? And it made it an awful lot easier. Scotland had very few line breaks. I don't think they had a single line break in like the last hour of rugby in Murrayfield against Ireland that day. And it felt similar at times that unless like Scotland would all out to target Creel, but it just feels like if you could slow down Tuipulotu and Jones, if you can get to them, that Scotland's attack, as many good parts are in it, just doesn't look as sharp.
Well, yes, and that's the worrying thing for me as a fan and as a coach as well, because if you look at it, and again we'll go back to the Ireland game in the Six Nations, we ended up having a back row forward throwing the ball in at a line out.
Van der Fleer,
Van der Fleer, and we didn't say, okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to throw the ball to the front jumper and just get secure ball, safe ball. And we did the same against South Africa. We kept throwing the ball to the back. Now, the back, it was some of the throws and some of the line out work was absolutely fantastic. But on the other side of things, they've got Archie Snyman, he's about 16 feet tall. Trying to get that ball over the top of him is just a difficult thing. Why not just stick it to the front and keep it safe? And also playing on that as well. If Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones aren't getting the ball that they're hoping for and they're being shut down, where's Darcy? Why is Darcy not coming in off the wing and taking an inside ball? Why are we not changing it up? And these are the little things that I would have expected the players to do, because if this isn't working, turn it around and move on. But it seems to be very much we're set in our ways. This is what we're going to do. It's all going through Finn and it's all going wide. Well, there's another side. There's a blind side rather than an open side.
Yeah, no, that's a very good summation as well. Because we expect Scotland's attack to just be incredible, but there is a means to it that is similar. They do like to go wide. They do like to have, say, Kinghorn in that swing option of 15. They like to have Jones and Tuipulotu almost running the same line and making defenders choose, or Finn throwing those flat passes. He had one in the first half that didn't go to hand. I think it was could have been Jack Dempsey. Just wonderful. And Finn has those moments. But when you shut down those options, it doesn't matter who's playing out half. If they have no one to pass to, they're not going to be getting anywhere. And that's one of the things.
Yeah, you're bang on. And sorry, I'm taking more time up here, but it's one of those situations where you've got, if you give Scotland time, they're a handful. It's like Fiji. Wales didn't give Fiji as much. There was some times that they gave them, the defence became a little bit poor. But if you give Fiji enough time, they can throw the ball around and absolutely tie in knots. But if you back them down and smother them a little bit, they struggle. And it's the same for Scotland. Scotland, if you give Blair Kinghorn time, he's going to come in quick and he's going to take a flat pass, or he's going to kick the ball over the top. But unfortunately, he didn't get the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's the thing. And this is kind of what, I don't want to say this could be Scotland's downfall, but every team is only as good as, their weakest parts. In Scotland, yes, then they're not the most physical team. We knew that there was always going to be a tough battle for them to maybe not just necessarily front up, but they had to get the set piece right against South Africa, which they did for a while. They had to get their breakdown work right. They had to attack, especially that blitz defense. They had to do it properly and, I suppose, accurately. And a lot of people are saying, okay, well, that's just the South Africa that we know. They're powerful, they're strong, they smother teams. They did. But at the same time, you look at them now to compare to the Lions Test series in 2021. They're a very different team. They're an on-ball team. Russ Petty had the stat here that I was just getting up. Their average meters per game in 2021 was 289. This year it's 532. They have become an on-ball team with lots of different options. I think having Aronsa and Colby and whoever they choose a fullback now in attack is going to do well. It feels like trending in the right direction. I understand it's only a 2-month tournament. There isn't that much time. But it certainly feels like South Africa are moving in the right direction, and they're not what we paint them to be in its entirety.
Yeah, and like you say, up front, you had Mozart and Etzebeth starting as your locks, and then if Etzebeth had a little bit of an injury, so they took him off as a precaution, and on comes RG Simon, who was a bit of a big lump and a very solid set piece operator. And I think Jim Hamilton on ITV said, "Oh no," when the camera panned towards Snyman as he was ready to come on. But one thing about the Scottish attack, when the Springboks defend, you normally see either the wing or the outside centre shoot out the line to stop at a source. That's where I think Scotland went a little bit wrong on the weekend. I think they should have tried to hit it up. All right, Damian is a bit big, but maybe hit it up at the 10-12 channel, and then maybe use the second phase to either go back blind or to push it out wide, where maybe South Africa might be a little bit slow folding around the defensive line. But every time you watch Africa, it's either a winger I think Jesse Creel did it a couple of times yesterday. They're just shooting out the line and just stopping anyone who's got the ball to pass it to the outside. And obviously Scotland are going to struggle with that. They did it once when Russell threw that pass to Dempsey or Hugh Jones, which didn't go to hand. They exploited it then, but they couldn't find a way to break through it for the remainder of the game. And like you said, the Springboks are a bit of a different side what we saw a few years ago when they won the World Cup. But it just shows, kicking is so important in modern day rugby. Now this year we've got the side that kick the most are France. And if you go up to someone in the street or wherever, someone says, "Oh, France are the best attacking side in the world," and I think Eddie Jones brought this up last week. That everyone says, "Oh, France are brilliant in attack and they can run it from anywhere," but it's their kicking game that allows them to do that. You've got the likes of Dupont, used to be in Tamac, but now Jali Bear has kind of slotted in that role. Thomas Ramos at fullback has probably had his most consistent year, and France kicked about 40 odd times on Friday night, but that's how they get their attack going. The Jamine try at the end from the replacement fullback that comes from a box kick from Luku, but it shows how important the tactical kicking is within this World Cup, and whoever kicks the best will win because they'll get more chances and more mistakes from the opposition in the air, and there'll be opportunities for them to attack.
100%. And it's funny, like no matter how many conversations we have, you can always boil rugby down to the same conversations. Kicking is so important. If you don't win the kick battle, you are to hide into nothing. No scrum, no win is what the French always say. Well, that's pretty true as well. You even look at, like, it's more of a sporting trope than a rugby one, but you have to win the midfield. You look at this game in particular, Libbok against Russell, okay, fair enough. I don't think Libbok was brilliant. I don't think Russell was bad. I think he just got shut down. South Africa won that midfield battle, of the four centres, hands down. I thought De Allende was, in my opinion, the man of the match. And like, these things are important. South Africa are winning these small battles, and we'll talk about them ad nauseum, for the next couple of weeks, because Ireland played them in 2 weeks' time. But certainly it feels like they're a team going in the right direction. And another team, I suppose, who weren't expected to go in the right direction, that we'll move on to now, is Jamie Joseph's Japan. Like, they had a bit of a thrown together performance, I think it's fair to say, but it was still enough to rain on Chile's vibrant debut in the World Cup in Toulouse. And yes, and I'll start with you. This was I don't want to offend people, but a hipster's choice of game for people on Sunday at 12 o'clock, but it delivered for a good while, and then Japan pulled away. But what do you make of it?
Yeah, it was quite a nice starter to the 3-course meal that we all had on Sunday with all the rugby. Obviously, you had the Japan-Chile game, then the Scotland-South Africa game, and then a chaotic ending with Wales-Fiji. But it was a brilliant start for Chile. Rodrigo Fernandez getting their first try at a Rugby World Cup, which is brilliant to see. I'm a big fan of Fernandez myself, and he's a terrific player. But then obviously Japan responded quite quickly with the Fakatava, the big second row, crashing over, and there's a bit of a defensive lapse by Gareth Hewlett, the inside centre, and then Japan kind of just played to their strengths. It wasn't the Japan that we know from 4 years ago, where they would be where they showed attacking intent against Scotland, when that game was another brilliant game, where they were scoring and creating stuff from everywhere and scoring some brilliant tries. But it was a bit more tight, I thought, from Japan. I think Jamie Joseph will be very happy with that after a bit of a tricky spell to the start of the year when they lost to Samoa, and obviously Michael Leach got himself a red card. I thought he was very good. He looked like a man that was out playing back for his shirt, and kind of saying sorry to his supporters about that red card by putting in a really good performance and getting a try for himself. But yeah, it was quite entertaining. I thought Chile played well in aspects. Obviously, I don't think many expected them to keep it up for the full 80 minutes, but they give a really good account of themselves, which is brilliant to see.
Craig, you tuned into this one as well. Like, personally, I only got to see the first 10 minutes or so after the first Japan try. Certainly the sense from a lot of people is Japan, were okay, eventually pulled clear. Chile made a good account of themselves. And in a pool where we don't really know how good a lot of these teams are, there's probably scope for them to maybe spring a 180-minute performance that at least rattles someone, is there?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think, and it showed with how Japan handled them. We're talking about Japan. Not, if you take Japan from 2019, they would have absolutely scored everything against them. It would have been an Ireland Romania score. So I think Japan gave them the respect that they deserve, and I think they tried to play more of a set piece game and then use the ball, and that's, I guess, why we didn't see so many tries. But obviously Chile's fitness and game management eventually led to them losing the game to the points that were scored against them. So I'm excited by them, and I think everyone seems to be. I think it's another team that's coming through that everyone seems excited. Same with Portugal, and it's going to be an interesting. These are the sort of matches that you tune into because you want to see what's happening, because you're kind of not that we're bored with all the usuals, but you get to that point where you think, right, well, we're going to see lots of kicking with England. We're going to see Scotland try their best to fail. We're going to, all these different things. So you want to go and try and watch these other matches that you think you're going to get almost more pure rugby, and sometimes it comes that way,
That's it. And it's important to note as well that this is a Japanese team who were in a World Cup quarterfinal 4 years ago. They've probably taken backward steps, some of it not of their own accord, with the Sunwolves being thrown to the wolves, if you'll pardon the pun. But Japan are 14th in the world and Chile are 22nd. But yet it still feels like, you know what, there is a bit of competition there in the tier 2 countries, which is good to see. And I think that's a major talking point from this World Cup, or coming into it, that we could probably see a World Cup where an awful lot of tier 2 teams, 5 or 6 of them, really put their hand up and say, we're getting somewhere, we're going places. And hopefully Chile are one of them. They're in that pool, of course, with England, with Argentina. That Argentina game could be fiery, to say the least, especially considering Argentina showed none of their typical fire at the weekend. So that one could be really interesting. And Japan play England then at the weekend. Feels like England will just bully them into submission, but still you can't write it off. You can't write anyone off. And this, the same goes for, I suppose, Italy, who we'll move on to now, lads. And they beat Namibia, and usually you'd say, okay, there's nothing to talk about here, but 52 points to 8, okay, one-sided, fair enough. But maybe it was just me, but I thought Namibia gave a really good account of themselves. For large passages, it felt like until, say, a Dogwu came off the bench and Italy started to use the subs, that Namibia just ran out of legs. They just didn't have the quality beyond that first 15. But to their credit, I think they lived with Italy for large passages. It was only, a 9-point game at halftime. That's still really good. I thought Dogwu in particular was good off the bench, but I thought Tommy Allen 8 from 8 in terms of the kicking tee. Lorenzo Canone, who I'm a big fan of, he was man of the match, scored the first try, the Benderson back rower. Italy probably won't spring a surprise in this World Cup. They probably have to deal with the Uruguay game. That's the big one, to make sure they are automatically qualified for 2027, to make sure they don't get caught in the hop. But Craig, I suppose for Italy, an awful lot of the talk beforehand was, okay, Kieran Crowley's leaving, they're probably going to take a backward step, but there is something very exciting about seeing an awful lot of young players, Gerbisi, Canone, Capozzo, putting their hands up. Rex was really good, and being the standout players. Yes, it's Namibia, but it is still a World Cup setting, and for an awful lot of them, their first World Cup game.
Yeah, we have arguments on the Scottish Rugby podcast about this on a regular basis, because I always say we need to give Italy more more thought than we do, because everyone thinks Italy are just, they were always the laughing stock or the wooden spoon guys from the Six Nations, but they have built and built and built. All started with these names just go right out of my head, but the ex Harlequins head coach who went over, Conor O'Shea. He's built he's put the foundations in place. Benetton are becoming stronger and stronger. I think Zebri is now starting to work on Zebri as well, which I think they've got nothing but to go upwards instead of, they're at the lowest ebb at the moment. But you have these players coming through. Franco Smith started the work with them. Quite happily put in Garbisi when everyone said, what, you putting this young 10 in there? There's no chance he's going to cause problems. All of a sudden he's almost as mercurial as Finn Russell. Everyone's talking about this fantastic player, and he is, and he's proven himself. And then you see these young players coming through. Okay, Paulo Adogu isn't a young player, but he has used the rules the right way, and he's hopefully going to get a second lease of life. And a Scotsman talking about Tommy Allen. There's a Scottish under-20 who we absolutely missed the boat with that guy. And people say there's a lot of detractors out there about Tommy Allen, but if you watched him play for Harlequins over the last wee while, he has slowly but surely got rid of those. He's squared off those corners, and he's making the job of playing at 10 look far easier than it used to be for him. And I really do like him.
No, he's excuse me. Tommy Allen is he's a good 10. Garbisi has the potential to be one of Italy's great 10s, but as well as that double playmaker option that they're using with Allen at 15 seems to be really working. Now, Allen has had defensive lapses at 15 in previous games, but against Namibia, that was never going to be the issue. But it's certainly a sign of the direction they're going in. There is a clear sign of things, and I suppose, yes, and just to finish off, like, we'd all love to see Italy competitive, but you look at the age profile of that team, it will be another few years before we see this team in full flux. But still, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that they could, beat Uruguay by a convincing enough margin that we all kind of have to take notice, and then go into those French-New Zealand games on an absolute high.
Yeah, and we saw in 2021 when Italy played New Zealand, New Zealand didn't score a try until well past the 20th minute, which a few years ago would have been quite a long day for the Italians. But it just shows how good that the youth system they've installed, thanks to Conor O'Shea, has been. You got Garbisi, who's playing in the top 14 every week, and Montpellier are a good side. You got Tommy Allen, obviously, he's a little bit older than the younger players that are coming through, but he's at Harlequins. Dino Fischetti, he was on London Irish before they went bust. So the younger players that are coming through, they're getting game time in the URC with Benetton and Zebra. Zebra have got a side which is filled with youngsters. Even in the front row, they're giving 22 or 23-year-olds chances to start in big games against experienced URC players, which is only going to do them good. And then once they develop a bit, all right, okay, some of the bigger clubs might swoop in for a couple of players, like we've seen with Garbisi. Obviously, Montpellier have got a little bit more money than Benetton, unfortunately. But it's a brilliant development ground for them, and we can see that for the weekend. And they've probably got one of the youngest squads in the entire tournament. I think I read somewhere, or it might not be the youngest, but somewhere near the younger side of the out of all the teams. And it might not be this World Cup, but it could easily be the next World Cup when all those players have got 4 more years of international rugby under their belts, and they could be a real good side by then.
Absolutely, and that's what World Cups are about in other sports as well. The chance you could look at these teams, you're like, well, I'd love to see them back here in a few years' time and doing well and improving. And say Japan were one of those teams in 2019. Obviously, they were hosts. Uruguay maybe not so much this time, but COVID and these things can can impact our familiarity with a team like that. But it promises to be a good clash between themselves and the Uruguayans in 2 weeks' time. But lads, we'll leave it at that. Just finally, before I hand it over to my conversation with Ben about England and about Australia, just overall thoughts on the weekend gone by. It was made for a good start, no doubt about it, but also at the same time, no massive surprises. And I suppose, Craig, it's maybe not as finely poised as we'd have liked. Maybe a couple of shocks would have been nice, maybe Fiji winning or Argentina winning or Scotland winning. But certainly you get the sense of this for the on-field action alone, because there's plenty of talk about anthems and high tackles and so on and so forth. But for the on-field stuff, it's been really good so far.
Yeah, I think what we have to remember is, and there's a positive and negative for me. We talked about it just before we came on air, and the refereeing has been almost, how can it's mind-boggling at times, and I find the refereeing has been disappointing. But on the other side of things, some of the touches from players, some of the skill that we've seen on display from every country that's played, and I'm not, every country has shown something, and it's been, a real exciting start to the weekend. I just feel, and you have to be proud of me that I didn't mention the referee decision in the Scotland review, because I'm always one for playing the whistle. You just play the whistle and that you play the referee, and that's the way it is. But World Rugby need to get themselves sorted out, because unfortunately the refereeing has been, in my opinion, fairly poor for the first weekend. Hopefully it will get better.
Well, we do hope for that 100%. And I suppose then this part of the pod, on a lighter note, Iestyn, probably no real marquee fixtures next week. Probably Australia, Fiji is the big one, but we do get a chance to see Portugal, to see Tonga, to see Samoa for the first time, and to see Uruguay for the first time. Portugal are probably the one that everyone can't wait to see, because they're, for those who have watched them, they really play an expansive brand of rugby. They take on your nation of Wales. Probably a few teams there. Tonga could really lay down a marker. Samoa might feel like they have to now, considering England look better than we expected and Argentina look much worse. So I suppose next weekend, maybe not marquee games, but a lot to be excited for as well at the same time.
Yeah, this is why I myself watch a World Cup, isn't it? We all know of the big teams, the likes of France, South Africa, New Zealand, but it's a chance to see the real tier 2 nations on a global stage. Unfortunately, World Rugby are kind of not really showing the tier 2 sides in real competitiveness. I remember a few years ago where there'd be tier 2 games being live streamed on YouTube or even televised somewhere. Unfortunately, we don't get that now, which is a real shame, and I hope World Rugby bring that back sooner rather than later. But the World Cup is it's a showcasing event for the tier 2 sides as well, because if we look at the Chile side this weekend, we got Torreira, the scrum half, who I thought was really good. The hooker Diego Escobar was another good player. And obviously we're going to see newer sides this week. Portugal are obviously going to be fun to watch. We know what Samoa can offer after they gave Ireland a little bit of a scare in the warm-ups. And Tonga's side is filled with plenty of players. And Santiago Arata plays for Uruguay. So what more do you want?
Absolutely. One of the few men who's taken Antoine Dupont looked at him and said, you know what, I can play just as well as you in a top 14 or European Champions Cup game. But it's been a weekend full of headlines, considering what has happened today, Monday. We hope that this podcast isn't struck down by GMCA regulations with the way World Rugby are going. But again, as I've said, with so many different things, we could have hours of conversations about what rugby is doing wrong. But for these 8 weeks, hopefully, touch wood multiple times, we can focus on the good stuff. Thanks very much to yourself, Iestyn, and to Craig. And for those listening, we will talk about England's win over Argentina and Australia's win over Georgia, with Ben coming up now. But once again, thanks to the two lads.
Thanks.